Hello, and welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. This episode, we will begin our discussion on I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erika L. Sánchez. Last episode, we continued our discussion on Sabrina and Karina by interviewing Kali Fajardo-Anstine herself. This episode, we will begin our discussion on I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by talking about the characters, themes, and connections we've made.
We're back. Welcome.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot has happened.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think it's worth talking about before we get into the book. So y'all had been to AWP in San Antonio, and as I understand, and
Correct.
what do y'all want to tell listeners about it?
I would like to talk about how different it was in comparison to last year, for sure. A lot of the panels that I was really interested in, like really excited about, were canceled. I didn't get to meet Elizabeth Acevedo.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it was still a really good experience.
It was nice having it in San Antonio, you know.
Yes, so close to home.
Mm-hmm.
I've been describing it as a post Thanos snap AWP. You know, so we continued on with our lives. It just half of the population was missing. I noticed there was some very glaring like absences. At the same time, though, since it's such a big conference, with the people who showed up, it was still quite a bit of people there.
Yes.
Writers and authors, and being immersed in this literary world. So that, I appreciated that still. At the time being, this whole COVID-19 stuff hadn't exactly been seen as much of a public threat as it is now. So in a way, we were, I guess, kind of lucky that we got to go to this, because as soon as we got back, like everything started getting canceled from sports, more conferences, gatherings. So I guess I'm kind of grateful to have experienced that. There were some nice panels. It was still nice to see a lot of friends that I hadn't seen in a while. Cool. There's some cool booths to visit and books.
Yes.
Can't go wrong with that.
And Kali.
Oh, yes, that's right. Actually, that would have been the perfect segue, because we had her on the last episode, and we were able to see, she was on a panel on with Maurice Ruffin from New Orleans. And it was all about like the year after you get your first big publishing, your book's published, what's that year like? Scheduling, touring, stuff like that, handling media.
Yes.
What did you pick up on that conference? In that panel?
I really liked Kali explaining how she saw the art for the cover that she has.
And you know what? I have friends who have had that art around too. I didn't realize it till after. I was at someone's apartment, and they had a print of that was like kind of outside of her book. Ultimately, though, and this is something I was kind of sharing earlier before we started recording. One of the things I really liked about this panel is that it was cut short. There were like 4 other people that were supposed to be on the panel.
Yeah.
And so the fact that it was just the 2 of them actually made it, to me, a more meaningful type of listen, because they were able to go more in depth.
Yes.
And both of them are so there's just such personalities, the characters, and so it was really fun listening to them. Big personalities. So it was funny, lighthearted, but they shared their stories, and I think, and it was probably one of the most packed one. That was the most packed panel that I had attended while I was there.
I think so too. Yeah.
Because there was like no sitting room in the back. Everyone was kind of
like standing. Yeah.
And we were able to give her a little thank you note on behalf of the podcast, and in light of COVID-19, I know people were being like kind of tricky on greetings, but I know when you handed her, she just like I want to hug you.
Yeah,
and
I was like, I want to hug you too.
but it was really cool. She came around from around the table to take a picture with us, and you guys looked great. It's a cool photo.
Yeah,
and it was nice seeing her.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I'm glad you two were able to go, and I'm glad you guys are back safe, and got to catch up with Gali and others. You said Natalia for a little bit. Natalia Sylvester.
She was there. Always cool seeing her. Jose Olivares, we saw him.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So. Which is our next book, right?
Yes.
Citizen Illegal. So we're really looking forward to that. And so that elephant in the room, you've been talking about the COVID-19. This is at the time that you guys are listening, it's been we've had 2 cases here in our city. Haven't been officially confirmed by the CDC, but presumptive. And so, all of us here in the city are taking precautions, just like every other city. So we're hoping that people, enact social distancing and just other washing hands, but definitely have to give it up to the healthcare workers who are the front lines.
The front lines.
Yeah. But we still wanted to keep this conversation going as long as we're all healthy for now, and hopefully for the foreseeable future. So this is our first look at Erika Sanchez's book, a National Book Award finalist, just like a lot of the other books we've talked about.
Yes.
And it's her first novel as well. So that says a lot about Erika. Even before we get into the specifics of the books, like the characters, what were some connections you all made to some of the other works we've reviewed?
There's so many.
Yeah,
there's a lot.
Well, patron saints, of course. Just the whole idea of going to, I guess, not to your home, but to where your ancestry is from,
your
I
roots.
guess. Your roots, yes.
Yeah.
Going home and kind of finding yourself in doing that. As well as kind of, investigating the death of a family member. And kind of finding out what was going on and finding out about them, as well as while you're also finding out about yourself.
What about you, Richard?
And a huge aspect of that, the need to go and find your roots is seeing a generational gap, right, between a parent. And again, this ties a lot to not just Patron Says Nothing, but also Poet X is having a disconnection from the main character, having a disconnect from their parents and their culture. And, you definitely see that here as well. Because
of the assimilation, you mean, and
a variety of things, right? The parents are immigrants, and so the culture is very different, right? Maybe a little bit more traditional or conservative in a lot of ways. Versus what they use the phrase a lot of times in here, Americanized.
Right.
Yeah.
And then as we learned from Mr. Ingman, when she's writing about that college application admissions essay, they're undocumented. So I think it's really interesting to talk about in terms of immigration. And there's we learn more about their journey, through the desert, which it just sounds exactly like Devil's Highway from
Luis Alberto Orea.
Yeah, because they go through Arizona, and as we all know, that's one of the most dangerous passages. And we'll get to the specifics later on, but Poet X, you mentioned also, her mom, right? Ama, is very similar to Xiomara's mom, in how religious she is and traditional,
and how disappointed she is, in her daughter's modernism.
and unlike Sumata though, here it's more. I mean, it's not so much with Sumata with twin. Here it's more because of Olga being kind of this she's put on a pedestal, and so everything that Olga was, she isn't, at least in her mom's eyes. So that's a big part of the conflict in this one that I saw resonate with Poetics as I was rereading that one.
Right. Yeah, good points. This one is also very allusion heavy, very much, in literature, in art, and pop culture.
Yes.
So music, movies, and then our main character here is an avid reader. She has such a hard time connecting with people, and one of her aspirations, of course, it's literary, right? To be an author while traveling, and so she has book references for days. You could turn the page and find two. We could make a nice list of everything that's there, and some of them surprised me, honestly. Like, wow, she's reading this, at this age, and which is really cool.
Sabrina and Karina.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Just like in that one, the idea of just losing a sister or losing a loved one, and having to deal with the aftermath, and also trying to reconstruct the relationship that existed by thinking about how it fits in with your family, the rest of your family.
Right.
I think even, of course, like Hate You Give, losing someone you love, and like thinking about how to move on from that, and what could have been different. There's points where Julia, which is who's the protagonist in this novel, she feels a lot of guilt from thinking about, well, maybe I could have done this or that, or picked her up.
She blamed herself a little bit too in some case.
Yeah. So there's that. I think also he has gone to be with the women in terms of
Yes.
a lot of the Mexican culture and violence, and there's suicidal ideation and suicide attempt with Julia as well. She has self-harms. This is considered a young adult novel, but I think it's interesting in a sense how it kind of stretches what we mean by a YA novel. Because normally when you think of that, you think of, well, it's going to be, safe for the classroom, for a middle school or high school. But these are pretty heavy things that the novel grapples with and that aren't easy to talk about, but I think are important. And I remember at I think it was the Texas Book Festival, or the Texas Teen Book Festival, Erika was there, and she was talking about that in her book. And a lot of the people, a lot of the attendees, were teenagers who were sharing their views on like how, they have all kinds of mental health concerns that this novel is kind of letting them talk about.
Absolutely. And that's a huge enough aspect in this book that outside of the story itself, the book provides help and guidelines for people from mental health, help and guideline suggestions, right?
Yeah.
And it's actually interesting that you mentioned that, the whole YA thing and like topics. You mentioned him already, but one of the characters in the book is her English teacher, Mr. Ingham. And she mentions why he's her favorite is that he doesn't talk down to them. She kind of mentions other teachers and like the way they approach the students, like they're dumb, talks down to them. But he treats them like people, right? And that's, I think any young adult wants this, right? And I think that even the genre itself, trying to figure out what's permissible, talking about, these are obviously things people go through.
Yeah.
And so I just think that's a good reflection that you see even in the story painted for you.
Yeah. What did you guys think of the writing style? Did it remind you of any of the other works or of any other work or writer?
Go
I think it's pretty accessible, and you mentioned it's very illusion heavy, so I think it does inspire curiosity and people. I confess I haven't read Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah.
So it made me curious about it. I know some things about it, but things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It does have Spanish, so I think there's that as well, but of course wouldn't be the first work. A lot of humor in it.
Reminds me of, I was going to say in a weird way, like, and not to say like he's the guy of the style, but reading Gino Diaz, who also kind of has this very easy, accessible style of writing, writing these kind of cool characters, very illusion heavy. And like, I think the humor plays into it a little bit as well.
Arturo Islas also.
We talked about Lamali and the King of Tears.
Yeah, his unfinished novel that I really recommend if y'all have read Rain God. I actually like it better than Rain God, which might be, many consider Rain God his greatest work, but yeah, so there's that.
You also have the main character, her voice is so like rebellious and abrasive that I enjoyed it. It was cool to see, like, all right, what is she gonna like rebel against today, or like when her observations, like, oh damn, it's like she's on it.
Yeah,
she has some very like acute, sensitive social observations that I think, and like the way she describes people, like, dang, what?
Yeah.
I mean, we'll dive into it later, but yeah, I have some passages where like, wow, that is some creative way of like introducing or describing people.
And people, and I think the food, I think to me stands out a lot, just like with Ben Science is,
right.
The humor in it of like, her mom gets on her for like not knowing how to make flour tortillas, and
what kind of woman doesn't know how to.
I mean, so that very like rolling the the pen, and so yeah, I found it like a really entertaining read.
It makes it very easy to just go by.
Yeah. What else, Vanessa?
Well, I like that you guys mentioned about how there are some really serious topics going on throughout the novel, which kind of reminded me of like what Randy Rebai had said during that panel about how these are like things that kids are experiencing. Like, we shouldn't shelter children or people from like what's actually happening in the world. Like, they should be aware. So I really like that this is also kind of going in that direction.
Without overdoing it either, it's not hyperbolical. I think it's realistic. So I think it's a notch below He Has Gone to Be with a Woman, which it doesn't really hold back in terms of the violence and things like that. It does it in a way where I don't think readers will be turned off, because I think that's the tricky part, is like when you deal with these kinds of issues, is readers can get triggered, and they'll stop reading.
I also think that Julia's character is really strong, just like Xiomara and Star. She's kind of finding her way through the world also.
Yeah, her strength is it's interesting how it develops,
right, yeah.
Like, just like Xiomara, like she finds the way to do it.
And also, like, how we always touch on, like, literacy sponsors. So I really like that her English teacher is also represented in that way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, kind of also like with Xiomara, like Father Sean, you know, and you know the same kind of care, you know, like he's not just doing his job, but he really does care, and kind of like the last story in he has gone to be with a woman, the hurting game, you know, he was a counselor, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, because I
Kind of
know
takes the extra step to help them out.
Yeah. So speaking of which, then what about which characters do we have here to give a quick summary of each?
So
Sorry.
one character who plays a really big role in the entire novel, but isn't actually in the novel per se, is Olga, who is Julia's sister. And right from the beginning, we find out that she has passed away. And that kind of is what, not directs, but kind of is why the story takes this direction and why Julia is investigating everything and going home to Mexico and everything.
Going through her things, you know, just
Yes.
like with Ewan and
Acting,
Patron Saints. It's definitely in that sense, like just like Patron Saints, like a mystery novel,
Right.
you know, because she's doing it covertly against her mother's wishes, and it really does make it seem like she's being a detective, because you don't realize well what is the truth, you know.
Yeah, and also that concept of like knowing what is knowing
Yes.
someone, and I think early on she has her sister pegged, right? It's like the good Mexican girl that they're always being compared to, like dressing modestly and working, finding a job, taking community college classes, and all these aspects. That's what she has her in the beginning as she knows her as, and then once she finds this gap of knowledge that she doesn't, what's this?
Yeah.
Right, like you said, it incites this further.
Right. And I also think that it's like interesting how it's also different from Patron Saints, because unlike how June's room has been completely changed and is now just a guest room, Olga's room has been kept exactly the way that she left it.
As a memorial.
Yes.
And that's the way Ribe in the book talks about it. How,
yes.
But
that's what he's expecting, and it doesn't end up being that. We have that here in this one.
And the mom's really strict about it too, right?
Yeah.
She puts a lock on the door.
Right.
Yeah. So what about her mom then?
I was gonna say she's like a typical Mexican mother, but that sounds wrong. I don't want to generalize like that, but I guess she's kind of portrayed as like a stereotype of what you would or what people expect, I think.
She's very strict, right?
Very strict.
She expects some certain type of and then a lot of the roles are very traditional like family roles.
Yes.
Right, gendered, and she does disprove a lot of, I guess you would say, Julia's ambitions, right? In a way, she kind of is like, well, why don't you go to college around here? And
right, because
anytime she
Julia
brings up
wants
university or
away
going
for
out of
college.
town.
Yes.
So you see that push and pull and through the mother. She's a hard work. She works hard, right? There's an instance, right, where Julia goes along with her to help clean, and by the end of the day, like Julia's just tired and wiped out, and on top of that, just like you see a lot of even through the lens of her mother, like the creepiness of men still. I think that was a section that really caught my attention, is when she thinks differently about her mother this way, how hard she works, and then having to deal with creepy clients, and then once you learn their document, you also understand maybe why they don't do as much socially or go out a lot. Like they keep to themselves, right? And she criticizes her parents for this, but this keeps them out of trouble. something people are always going to want to avoid if they're undocumented and getting caught or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I do think in this, like, there's that positive stereotype that you mentioned of, like, she's a hard worker, and we have that stereotype in Mexican culture. And I think even if in some ways she does seem stereotypical or archetypal, maybe, I think she's complex, and once you take her as a whole, once you learn about, like, the skeletons that she has in the closet, definitely see her in a different light. So yeah, even though I think she's the main, source of conflict for Julia, kind of what's holding her back, I think, and I think it's also true, a lot of women that I know who are Mexican, they have the same issues, like a lot of our students, where they're asked to, like, stay home and take care of the kids, or just, cook and things like that. So it's still something that's very real.
Yeah.
What about her dad, though?
Papa. Well, I mean, as far as we see her dad, right? On the other side of the coin, he works at a candy factory. It's a lot of labor intensive as well. And so when he gets home and he kind of has his role where he just kind of plops down on the couch, drinks beer and watches TV, right? I think she describes it. That I think that annoys Julia as well, but in a way Julia kind of takes advantage of that, where if her mom's not around, she does that thing where, like, I'm gonna go out. It's like, your mom's gonna get mad if she finds out, and to her, like, well, that's not a no. And so she goes, and she's like, oh, I'm gonna go out. I didn't hear no. But as far as he goes, I do think that there's a distance, I guess, maybe an inability to communicate. That reminds me of like Patron Saint of Nothing, right? The relationship between parents as well, like, and their inability to kind of just talk about things and communicate.
Right.
I think and that's a huge source of anxiety and tension and apprehension for Julia, is her that gap, that distance between both her parents.
And I think also with Xiomara's dad, I remember one of the poems talks about how he's, just because you're present doesn't mean you're not absent.
Yeah.
And it seems kind of the same way with him.
He misses home a lot. Right?
Yeah.
I know when they have their family get-togethers, he's just kind of described as looking down at his drink, kind of somewhere else.
Yeah. And when she does go to Mexico, you find out more about, like, the way he was over there, that just seems so different than the way he is over here. So again, kind of goes back to them being undocumented and, like, not realizing your dream and just kind of being a shell of yourself.
There's like that aspect too of immigration, the sacrifice of the generation for the younger generation. And of course this is true. Julia's mother loves to guilt trip her about that though, right? They're sacrificing all this for you.
Yeah.
It's true, right? But she calls her the queen of guilt trip.
Yeah. Right. Who else?
There's also Connor, who I think you can compare him to Haley a little bit from The Hate U Give. Not as extreme, but he also doesn't really understand where Julia is coming from in the same way that Haley doesn't understand where Star's coming from, kind of.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I think also Chris, the boyfriend, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think Chris as well.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a better comparison, actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like how they have like things in common. Like they both read a lot, and that's kind of their first way of connecting with each other. And then also that Julia isn't used to that kind of attention. where someone is actually genuinely interested in her as a person,
Right.
and so kind of the intellectual interest that they share is something that really sparks something in between them. Even though you're right, I think that, because he's white, he just, for him, it's hard to kind of fathom some of the things that she goes through. Who else? We talked about Mr. Ingman, honors English, supportive.
You got the friends. Lorena.
Oh, yeah.
Angie.
Yeah. Juanga.
Juan.
As,
The character.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, kind of good ways of her finding ways to express herself, right? Because it seems she kind of feels suffocated by being at home, given that, her mom isn't supportive of what she wants. Her mom wants a quinceanera, for instance, that she's already past that age, for one. And
I think, a couple months from turning 16.
Yeah. And it also seems, like a consolation prize for, something Olga would have had, right?
She didn't have a chance to have one, right?
Yeah. Any themes that we haven't touched on?
Religion.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So Julia's mom is very religious. Especially after all the things that she's gone through, which we'll talk about in the next couple of episodes. But yeah, it's like, I think religion does play a really big part of her character. And I feel like I'm mixing this up with Poetex. Does Julia question it, or does she?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right from the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, am I mixing this up? I can't be.
Yeah, definitely one of the reasons why she clashes with her mom.
She questions a lot of Bible teachings and customs.
Yeah, just like Sumara.
And so of course the mother is like, no, don't do that.
Yeah. Just like we talked about patron saints, the hybridity that she's Americanized, but this is a novel about going back to your roots, and what does that mean? Not selling out, not forgetting where you come from. So kind of also like Doug and giving back to your community. There was also a show that I was checking out called Gentified. I don't know if you all have seen it.
I'd heard about it. I haven't had a chance to check it out yet.
Yeah, just one episode so far in, but kind of similar premise where you have one of the family members who, is very Americanized, and he doesn't really stand up for his community. And so it reminded me a lot about that. How there's economic advantages that come with selling out, access to resources and people, connections, etc. But, you leave your own family behind in some cases. So I think there's that too. She's disconnecting from her mom because of the she's pushing too hard, but I think she's also losing out on some things because of how, she doesn't really appreciate as much as she could. But I think, again, it goes back to the way that her mom is parenting her.
Yeah, and I think it's also hard because she's literally dealing with the loss of her sister, and her mom's like, well, why aren't you more like your sister was? And that, I feel like that has to be so hard.
That is very true. I think, especially because her mom, there's several moments in the novel where her mom is very clearly laying the blame on her, for her Olga dying in different ways.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's at least something that, she's clearly the black sheep of the family. And, ironically, her push for getting educated, learning about the world, is actually making her her mom's relationship more problematic.
Right.
So, was there anything else?
Well, I think it's interesting that her mom actively mentions that, oh, I'm making all of these sacrifices for you. But she, at the same time, isn't pushing her to go to a university. She's like, just stay here at home with us, kind of thing. So I think that that's really interesting also.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a contradiction, you know, and even maybe hypocritical that, you know, you want your kids to get ahead, but at the same time, you want to keep them tied in.
And also, like, I don't think, I mean, her parents didn't go to college, their education, they don't have it. So
Yeah.
they don't, I don't know if they just see that either as an opportunity. Just maybe a good life for them is finding a job, being able to work, having a family, staying close to family.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely do wonder how things would be different for Julia if she was a boy, a teenage boy, you know, and whether she would get that much pushback.
Yeah.
You know, for one, there wouldn't be a quinceañera.
Is this your way of telling us you want a quinceañera? You want one?
He said, I never got one.
That's it. No, that's absolutely true, right?
Yeah. Did even so before we get to the maybe the first half of the novel and the next episode, did y'all find any connections for your own personal life? You know, not getting your own quinceañera or
I definitely didn't have my own quinceañera. No. I don't think I really wanted one though.
Yeah.
Did your family want one though?
No, they were like, it's just for a couple of hours, and it was like kind of like, you can go to school with the money, or you can have quinceañera, and it would be for a couple of hours. And I was like, well, in that case,
Yeah.
we'll save that money and use it towards something else, you know?
Yeah.
For me, it's the family get-togethers that, you know, being, you know, told, oh yeah, being introduced to strangers, saying, oh, they're your relative, just like not knowing people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, they're a cousin. They're a cousin of so and so and so. Okay.
Yeah.
And then just
Yeah.
you know, that environment, like the kids running around, and you know, like,
Yes.
like that's
Yeah.
the food, of course, like just eating. And, that definitely reminded me of just, you know, my own experiences with family growing up.
Yeah. I think all of us being English majors also like, you know, at those family gatherings you mentioned, like when you have a book with you or you're talking about
Oh,
books
yeah.
or they ask you like, well, what are you going to do with an English major? And
Yeah. What are you gonna do with that?
My favorite
yeah.
question.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's that comic about like what, you know, the president needing they need an English major. Like, I got you. Yeah, that's actually a good point. You know, that kind of aspect of maybe even also feeling misunderstood, like, and even in a friend group, like her friends aren't exactly into the same stuff. You know,
Yeah.
culture and art and literature. And
Yeah, my friends definitely are not on that same page as I am. Yeah.
And then
on the same page,
Did you catch that one?
literally. Literally and figuratively, you know, on the same page.
oh
On the
yeah,
page. Yeah, because we're talking about how I love books.
yeah. Right. We haven't talked about the setting. I've never been to Chicago. Have you guys?
No.
Never.
So you know, she goes to museums. She mentions Lincoln Park. So it was interesting learning about the city, and I think Erika herself is from there. I think Jose Olivares, our next offer, is from there as well. We were actually looking forward to going to see the play adaptation, and I know some of our listeners were asking about that. So we were planning on going, but you know, because of course COVID-19, we're not going to be able to. But maybe in the future, you know, if they have another run. So
Yeah. Art will live.
But we heard great things about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the set just looks beautiful, without even seeing any of the performances.
I'm always amazed to see theatrical adaptations of books, to see how they conceive,
Yeah.
create these sets, especially interchangeable sets and everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Just I guess her intertextual mind of being able to on the spot think of these allusions, right? Like, I mean, one of the ones that just kind of got me shocked was like Bartleby. You don't have too many kids reading Melville for fun, and she just drops the whole reference, right? When she doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I prefer not to. But she that's an interesting skill, and I that's how my mind works a lot, just thinking of, other in situations.
I feel like that's basically all we do is like just make connections with other things and reminds me of this,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the gifts of being an English major.
Right. Yeah.
If any of you are still struggling to find your major, maybe it's not too late.
Come to the dark side. Just kidding. I don't even-
Yeah. So
I'm trying to think. I mean, there is a lot, like, but I guess it might be more meaningful discussion when diving through the actual text itself. So,
and then we'll talk some of the differences between there's a couple differences between the paperback and the hardcover.
Oh yes.
So
yeah, that's worth talking about.
Let's do that.
In terms of publishing, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite things is from the paperback one that it has the kind of like a like a guided
teaching guide.
Teaching guide, yes, or like questions.
Is it marketed that way? Anyway?
What's that?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
cover.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
Doesn't mention
With
it.
study questions,
Yeah, they're like little things
Yeah.
you can talk about.
Yeah, maybe it's also a paperback thing because I was seeing that Kali, Sabrina, and Karina, you were telling me,
Yes.
had the reading guide too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those are really great too for like book clubs, and if you guys are having that.
Yeah.
I know that AWCC recently had a book club over this book as well.
Oh yeah, we had that
Yes.
too.
So we went to that and had some delicious food.
And we got some people interested in reading it, who hadn't read it before. When I met Erika at the Texas Teen in Dallas, she was really nice, and I really appreciated being able to talk to her for a couple of minutes and telling her a little bit about El Paso, and maybe one day she'll visit here. But, yeah.
So do we have any other differences between
The hardcover on the book jacket
Yeah.
kind of lists the characters and kind of gives little what would you consider that? I was gonna say
Like
synopsis.
bios?
Yeah, bios, duh.
little character bios? Little brief. I mean, they're like blurbs. They're super brief,
Yeah.
but it gives you just kind of a glimpse into who this is. And I like it too because I've been, speaking of like carrying on books, I carry this around with me. If I'm reading something, I'll bring it to the bar sometimes and read if I'm there early, waiting for friends. So I was at the Tap recently, meeting up with some friends, and got there early. So I had it. I had my other friends at the table, and of course, one of the things I do like about it is there's no like oftentimes you pick up a book, you go to the back and to read what it's about. You don't have that here, which is, I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
You have some nice, like I said, blurbs, but you also have. Oh, does
interesting.
yours does?
Yeah,
his
mine
has
does.
a
The
Okay.
paperback.
synopsis.
So there's another thing with the jacket then.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
instead of, I'd like in lieu of the synopsis, you have these little character bios, right? And that's kind of a way of.
I also like that on the back of the book jacket, it has the honors and praise for the book
Yeah.
from the time that it was, I guess, published.
Yeah.
I'm like, hello?
Well deserved praise.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I mean, so I guess like with any other show though, like if you guys grab a copy, a lot of my friends, more than almost any of the other books we've been reading, except for maybe Signs, when I bring it out, people are like, "Oh, that's on my list." How is it? You know, people, so it's very visible, and I think people do want to read it. So I think that's cool thing.
And if any of our listeners were able to check out the play adaptation before they had to close down, you know, we'd love to hear your thoughts on what it was like.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode discussing I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erika L. Sánchez. And if you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Literally Literary is brought to you by the Mellon Foundation through the Humanities Collaborative at EPCC and UTEP. Follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep and on Twitter at literallylitep.